They said justice was blind, but that morning, justice stared straight into the eyes of a decorated black general and tried to erase her legacy. What the judge didn't realize, this wasn't just any medal, this wasn't just any woman, and this courtroom wasn't ready for the storm she carried in silence. General Naomi Carter had been through war zones and White House dinners, had seen bullets fly and medals shine, but she had never walked into a battlefield like the one waiting for her inside Millstone County Courthouse. The courtroom buzzed in hushed whispers. It was 9:02 a.m. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and in stepped a woman with quiet power in her stride. General Carter's full military uniform carried the polish of precision, and pinned to her chest was the Medal of Honor, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, like a silent witness to something deeper than rank or ribbon. Her boots echoed with quiet defiance on the marble floor. Her back was straight, her gaze forward. She didn't walk in to make a statement. She was the statement. Everyone noticed. Judge William Bowers looked up from the bench, pausing as if interrupted. His pale eyes narrowed beneath silver brows, focusing on the medal, not the woman. His lips twitched in irritation. Naomi Carter wasn't there for herself. She came for Maya Roberts, a grieving military widow, sitting quietly in the front row, hands trembling, clutching the folded flag that once draped her husband's casket. Private First Class Darnell Roberts had died just days after returning from Afghanistan. The Army ruled it non-service related, which meant Maya would receive no survivor benefits, no support, no honor, just silence and debt. But Naomi Carter had read the medical reports. She had seen the timeline. Darnell Roberts didn't just die. He deteriorated under the weight of delayed treatment and quiet neglect. When Maya had written to the support network in a desperate plea, it was Naomi who answered. Her reply had been short. He counted, to me, and now, Naomi stood beside her. Not as a former general, not as a symbol, but as a witness. Name for the record, Judge Bowers asked coldly. She answered calmly. Naomi Rose Carter, Major General, United States Army, retired, here on behalf of Mrs. Maya Roberts. The judge paused, eyebrow raised. Did you say Major? He smirked. Quite a title, Carter. Or is it Carver? He glanced at the docket. You're not on record as counsel. Carter, Your Honor, she replied, voice steady. The judge looked directly at the medal. I see you've come fully decorated. She's my advocate, sir, Maya whispered. She's not here to cause trouble. He ignored her. This is a courtroom, not a parade ground. That medal may mean something out there, General. But, in here, it's a distraction. Naomi's chin lifted a degree. It's not for show, Your Honor. It was earned, and it honors those who never made it home. Silence fell. The judge's voice dropped an octave. I don't care what it honors. This court has rules. If you're not a registered party, you'll sit silently, and you'll remove that medal. Do I make myself clear? A veteran in the back row shifted uncomfortably. Naomi's eyes didn't blink. With respect, sir, the medal stays. So do I. Tension crackled through the room. The judge's face tightened. Remove it, or I'll have you removed. The court officer Delgado, a broad-shouldered man with the discipline of old service in his frame, took a single step forward. He didn't move aggressively, but the room felt the shift. Maya leaned in close. Please, she whispered to Naomi. You don't have to prove anything. I can't lose you too. Naomi glanced her way, and for the briefest second, something softened. If I do this, she said quietly, who will stand after me? She turned back to face the judge, her hands clasped calmly behind her back. Two forces collided in that silence, one backed by a gavel, the other by sacrifice and steel, and the courtroom for a breath belonged to neither. The silence held. Like a breath no one dared exhale. General Naomi Carter stood tall, unmoving, eyes fixed on the bench. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. She just waited, calm and still, as if the weight of her presence alone was enough to steady the storm. The courtroom, still stunned, looked from the judge to the general and back again. Judge Bowers tapped his gavel once, perhaps expecting it to restore his authority. It didn't. If anything, it seemed smaller than before, like a plastic toy in the presence of something real. Delgado didn't move. His eyes, steady and unreadable, stayed locked on Naomi. He had known her once, not personally, but by reputation. Her name had come up in briefings back in his active days, always followed by words like unshakable, leader, or took the hit so others didn't have to. Now, here she was, being told to take off her Medal of Honor in a courtroom that claimed to represent justice. But the thing about justice is, it doesn't live in titles. It lives in moments, and this was one. Judge Bowers leaned forward. Last warning, General Naomi didn't blink. I understand, but she didn't move. Instead, something strange happened. A sound broke the silence, not a voice, not a cough. It was the soft scrape of a wooden chair. Someone was standing. From the back row, an older man in a faded VFW jacket rose. He was thin, with weathered hands that had likely once held a rifle. Without a word, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn pin, a campaign ribbon, years old and dulled with time. He placed it gently on his chest, over his heart, and sat back down. Then another stood, a younger woman in civilian clothes. She pinned her late father's dog tags to her collar, one by one. Like ripples in a still pond, people stood and revealed something. A badge, a pin, a photo, a folded flag pulled gently from a purse. They weren't defying the court. They were remembering who they were. Judge Bowers stared at the growing sea of silent defiance. For a moment, the gavel hovered over his hand, but he didn't strike it. "Remove her," he finally said, voice tight. Delgado looked at Naomi, then at the gallery. Slowly, he stepped forward, but instead of grabbing her, he turned and whispered something to the bailiff. Whatever it was, it caused a pause. The bailiff stepped back. Delgado faced the judge. "With respect, sir," he said quietly, "this isn't a security issue. No one here is a threat." The judge's face flushed. He wasn't used to resistance. Not like this, not from his own staff. "Then I'll hold her in contempt." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "For wearing a medal you can't take away." The words weren't defiant. They were ... sad. Maya clutched Naomi's sleeve again. "You don't need to carry all of this." Naomi finally turned to her, voice gentle. "Then who should?" The judge sat back. Something in his expression changed, a flicker of something old. Fear, guilt, recognition. It passed as quickly as it came. 10-minute recess, he snapped. Off the record. And just like that, the courtroom dissolved into murmurs. Outside, the morning light spilled across the courthouse steps. Naomi stood in it quietly, her hands clasped. Delgado followed her out and stood beside her, as if guarding something sacred. He glanced her way. "I read about what you did in Sangar Valley." Naomi gave a faint smile. "Most people haven't. I did," he said. "My brother was one of the medics you held the line for." Naomi nodded once. "That's why we do it." Delgado looked toward the courthouse doors. "You know you just made an enemy, right?" "I didn't come here to make friends," she said. "I came here to make something right." He lowered his voice. "Bowers, he's not just a stickler for rules. That man's buried things deeper than anyone's dug." Naomi met his eyes. "Then it's time someone started digging." Back inside, Maya sat alone for a moment. She held her husband's folded flag like a lifeline, her eyes scanning the courtroom. Her voice, when she finally spoke to herself, was barely a whisper. "Please, let this matter to someone." She didn't know it yet, but the video clip of Naomi's silent stand was already being uploaded. A teenager in the gallery had recorded it, the stare down, the silence, the rising of veterans. It hit social media before the judge's recess even ended. By lunchtime, it had over 2 million views. By sunset, it had started a movement, but none of that was known. Yet not by Naomi, not by Maya, not even by Judge Bowers, and certainly not by the Department of Defense, whose quiet paper trail Naomi had just started to uncover. Because this wasn't just about a medal or a courtroom. It was about what was lost behind polished wood and sealed files. What happened to Darnell Roberts wasn't an isolated case, and Naomi Carter.com/decorated, determined, had come not to fight, she'd come to expose. And somewhere, in the courthouse basement, a document marked classified sat in a folder with Darnell's name, and 3 others just like him. The truth didn't just whisper, it waited, and Naomi had just stepped into its shadow. The courthouse felt different after the recess, like the air had changed. There was a heaviness, not of fear, but of anticipation. The way a room waits before something important is said. Naomi reinterred with the same composed posture, but this time the whispers didn't follow her with suspicion. They followed with respect. Even those who didn't understand what had just happened felt its weight. Maya sat beside her, hands still tight around the folded flag, but Naomi's eyes weren't on the judge anymore. They were on a young man near the back, a court clerk, who had looked up the moment she walked in. He had the awkwardness of someone trying not to be noticed, and yet, his gaze never left her. He knew something. Delgado returned to his place near the bench, but before the judge entered, he passed Naomi a folded note. She opened it slowly. It wasn't handwritten. It had been typed. Ask about file 2291B. They denied more than just Maya's claim. There was no signature. She read it once, then again. Her mind filed it instantly, not as panic, but as purpose. Moments later, Judge Bowers returned to the bench, face unreadable. I'm prepared to proceed, he said, eyes not meeting hers. Naomi spoke calmly. Permission to address the court before we begin. He hesitated. On what grounds? I believe the case before this court lacks full context. I request the introduction of supplemental records. She handed over a sealed envelope. Bowers took it reluctantly, scanning the cover. His fingers paused halfway through turning the first page. Something in his expression shifted. These weren't included in discovery, he said sharply. They weren't in the public file. Naomi replied, but they exist. Records of post-service medical reviews tied to PFC Darnell Roberts and others, including statements from unit medics, Red Cross interviews, and an internal memo marked no action recommended. The gallery grew still. I move that the court take this under review before ruling on Mrs. Roberts' claim. The judge glanced down, his face hardening, then looked at the court clerk, the same young man, whose hands were trembling now as he filed the envelope into the system. He had seen those files before, and Naomi knew it. Motion deferred. The judge snapped. We proceed with the hearing. Maya leaned close. What was that? Naomi whispered. It was the beginning. Outside the courthouse, the world was catching up fast. The clip of Naomi standing silent before the judge had been picked up by veteran groups, shared by retired officers, even reposted by a former senator. But it wasn't just the medal. It was the look, that unwavering calm, that refusal to bend. People didn't know the whole story yet, but they knew enough to care, and some, especially those who'd worn uniforms, knew what it meant when someone stood in full dress at a civilian court hearing. Naomi Carter wasn't grandstanding. She was testifying, without words. That afternoon, while the hearing dragged on inside, a small group began forming quietly outside the courthouse. Veterans, widows, students. They didn't carry signs, they just stood. Some wore uniforms, some held photos, but all of them faced the building as if waiting for it to speak back. Inside, Naomi remained composed as the judge reviewed Maya's appeal. He leaned heavily on procedural jargon, timelines, filing dates, criteria for what constituted service-related loss. But Naomi heard something beneath the words. He was nervous, not because he feared the case, but because he recognized that someone had finally walked in who could challenge the entire structure. It wasn't just about Maya anymore. It was about how many others had been quietly turned away. As Bowers read, Naomi's mind moved through details like a soldier checking coordinates. Two names she remembered from the file. Both denied. Both had families who reached out, and both had died within 60 days of discharge. Patterns didn't lie. People did. When the judge paused to review an attached document, Naomi turned slightly to Delgado. Do you trust the clerk? She asked quietly. Delgado hesitated. He's new, but his older brother, he served with mine, could mean something. Can you find out if he gave me that note? Delgado nodded once, and moved toward the hallway. Naomi sat back. She wasn't tired, not the way people get from standing too long or being watched too hard. She was tired from carrying truths that were heavier than any backpack she'd worn in combat. When she had earned her Medal of Honor, it hadn't been from a single act. It had come from 12 decisions, made over 6 days, in a mountain pass no one talks about now. 12 decisions, 12 lives saved. But the hardest decision wasn't made under fire. It was this one, too. Return home and keep fighting when no one asked her to risk the comfort of retirement for the silence of buried stories. And now, a judge was trying to erase that medal like it was a name written in chalk. But he didn't know Naomi Carter. He didn't know that the moment he tried to remove the symbol, he only made the meaning louder. Outside, the crowd had grown, quiet, still watching, but something else was about to happen. The young clerk, shaking slightly, returned to the courtroom and slipped a small envelope to Delgado. Delgado opened it and passed it discreetly to Naomi under a legal brief. Inside was a printout. It showed metadata logs, 3 cases with suspicious filing changes, all in the same format, all denied within minutes of submission, and each one signed off by the same initials, WB. Naomi's breath didn't change, but her hands gently folded the paper, and she turned slowly to Maya. It wasn't just a mistake, she whispered. It was a decision. Maya's eyes filled with something between heartbreak and clarity. Naomi faced forward again, her voice low but clear. Your Honor, with respect, I move that we pause this hearing until the integrity of the claim process can be reviewed by an external body. Bowers looked up sharply. On what basis? Naomi held up the paper without speaking. He squinted, then blinked. It was the only time his hands visibly trembled. There was something in those initials he hadn't expected her to see, and just like that the room tilted, not literally, but the power shifted, and Naomi Carter knew this wasn't the end of the hearing, it was the beginning of the reckoning. For a long moment, Judge Bowers said nothing. He sat there, unmoving, as if the paper Naomi had handed him weighed more than it should. His eyes scanned it quickly, then again, slower this time, tracing the metadata logs, seeing the pattern she had already put together. The initials at the bottom were his own, and he knew it, but he wasn't the only one reading something important in that moment. Delgado, standing near the doorway, gave Naomi a subtle nod. The clerk had confirmed what she suspected. The filing alterations weren't random, they were part of a pattern. Someone, somewhere, had made decisions that quietly denied people like Maya, and perhaps many more. And now Naomi had proof that those decisions had been more than just oversights. They had been deliberate. I'll remind you, General Bowers said slowly, his tone icy but quieter than before. This is a hearing, not an investigation. Naomi didn't flinch. Then perhaps an investigation is overdue. The gallery stirred. Naomi turned slightly. The quiet outside had grown louder, not with shouting or chants, but with something far more difficult to ignore: silence. Rows of people still stood across the lawn, facing the courthouse in absolute stillness, like witnesses waiting for a verdict that wasn't printed on legal paper. They weren't angry, they were listening, and that silence was louder than any protest. Bowers cleared his throat. This court recognizes Mrs. Roberts' appeal, but these documents were not submitted through official channels. Their authenticity can be verified. Naomi cut in, her voice even. Each entry on that metadata log comes with a corresponding timestamp in the federal DoD system. Cross-reference it with your own court filings. If you're confident in your records, it should only take a few minutes. The judge hesitated. There was a small but unmistakable shift in his posture, a kind of recalculation. Naomi watched it closely. She'd seen it before in negotiations, in battlefield diplomacy. In the moments before, a superior officer admitted something wasn't going according to plan. Bowers was weighing 2 risks: continuing to deny, or allowing something he couldn't control to move forward. Then he leaned back in his chair. This hearing is adjourned for 24 hours, he said, the gavel tapping with carefully measured restraint. We will reconvene tomorrow with proper review. He stood, robes sweeping behind him as he exited without another glance. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The energy was already crackling beneath the surface. Naomi turned to Maya, who gripped her hand like someone who'd just been pulled out of deep water. Did we win? Maya whispered. Naomi shook her head. No, we bought time. But now, they'll be watching every move. Outside, as the courthouse doors opened and the crowd spotted Naomi and Maya emerging side by side, something unexpected happened. An elderly woman in a navy dress coat stepped forward. On her lapel was a faded ribbon, a Korean War nurse's pin. She didn't speak. She just placed her hand over her heart and nodded once. Then a teenage boy behind her, holding a photo of a man in uniform, did the same, and soon the whole front row followed, saluting in silence, not out of protocol, out of something deeper, out of respect. A man in civilian clothes stepped beside Naomi. His voice was soft, like he was trying not to interrupt the moment. I'm with the State Legal Oversight Committee. We saw the footage. We'd like to meet privately. Naomi gave a curt nod. Tomorrow morning, before reconvening. He handed her a card. She didn't look at it, just slid it into her pocket and returned her attention to Maya, who was now smiling through tears. As they walked toward the waiting car, Maya said, "You didn't have to do this for me." Naomi smiled faintly. "I didn't." Maya looked confused. "I did it for all the ones they thought wouldn't fight back," Naomi said. That night, Naomi sat alone in her study, reviewing every name she had collected over the years. Families who had reached out, letters never answered, complaints shelved. She opened a locked drawer and retrieved a small red binder, its cover worn, its corners frayed. Inside were handwritten notes from fellow officers, medics, chaplains, and military spouses, all describing situations eerily similar to Maya's. Some were decades old. All had the same thread: denial of support, patent delays, the same phrases repeated: non-service related, ineligible, insufficient documentation. It wasn't just Bowers, it wasn't just this court. It was a system built to wear people down quietly. Naomi closed the binder and leaned back. Her thoughts weren't racing, they were aligning, sharpening. She wasn't here to win one case, she was here to uncover the truth. At dawn, she met with the legal oversight official in a quiet room near the courthouse. He brought documents, files, a list of rejected claims under Judge Bowers, docket over the past 15 years, and something even more telling: 3 internal memos, redacted, but still legible enough. One line stood out: high-value medals, may prejudice juror or judge sentiment, advised removal in courtrooms where outcome is uncertain. Naomi read it 3 times, then set the paper down. They weren't just afraid of medals, she said. They were afraid of what they stood for. "Will you testify?" the official asked. Naomi didn't hesitate. Yes, but not just for this case, for every single one of them. Later that morning, as she stood once more in her dress uniform, waiting for the court doors to open, she caught a glimpse of the clerk again. This time, he gave her a respectful nod, not of apology, but of quiet solidarity. Naomi stepped inside, ready to speak, not just as an advocate, but as a voice for the unseen. Because sometimes, the most powerful battles happen not with weapons, but with truth spoken aloud. And this time, the silence wouldn't win. Naomi walked into the courtroom before the doors officially opened, escorted, not by a security guard, but by the oversight official who now carried a black folder clutched tightly to his chest. The air inside was oddly calm. No press cameras, no murmurs, just the hum of the overhead lights and the faint rustle of legal papers being arranged like chess pieces. Judge Bowers had not yet entered, but Delgado was already at his post. His stance was more rigid today, but his eyes met Naomi's with something new in them. Not deference, not duty, quiet resolve. That she sat beside Maya once again. She noticed Maya's hands weren't trembling today. Instead, Maya looked around, at the empty seats slowly filling in, and whispered, "Do you think anyone else will come?" Before Naomi could answer, the side door opened. And they came, not in uniform, but unmistakable. Veterans, Gold Star families, widows with folders in hand, men in suits carrying documents clipped with yellowed paper. Row by row, they stepped in and filled the gallery. Some sat upright, others hunched slightly, wearied by years of waiting, but they all carried something. Evidence that this wasn't just a hearing anymore. This was becoming a reckoning. When Judge Bowers finally entered, the silence in the courtroom wasn't out of obedience, it was the silence of witnesses. He paused, only a fraction before stepping to the bench, but Naomi saw it. He noticed. He sat, looked out across the gallery, then slowly lowered his gaze to Naomi. "Are you prepared to proceed?" he asked. Naomi stood. "Yes, Your Honor," with new evidence and additional testimonies pending. Bowers' jaw tensed, but he gestured for her to continue. Naomi opened the binder. This time, not the red one from her private drawer that would come later. This one was filled with documents gathered in just 24 hours from people who'd watched, listened, and realized they weren't alone. She held up the first one. "This is from the family of Corporal Elijah West, whose benefits were denied after a procedural delay, 3 months before his file was reassigned, directly under your supervision." She placed it on the desk. "Here's another. The widow of Sergeant Lena Boone denied medical support due to what was called a filing inconsistency, later traced back to manual edits in this courtroom." Another document, then another. Each one was a thread, but together they were forming a pattern. "You are implying malpractice," Bowers said coldly. Naomi didn't blink. "No, sir. I'm stating that a culture of silence has enabled repeated harm to those who served, and I believe the evidence will show that it wasn't isolated, ... It was institutional. The courtroom was still. Even Maya seemed surprised at how directly Naomi had said it. But Naomi knew this was the moment. You don't charge a hill halfway. The oversight official stood. We respectfully request a motion to review the complete docket of Judge Bowers' decisions on military benefit claims over the past 10 years. Bowers' eyes narrowed. You can't be serious. But before he could continue, something unexpected happened. From the back of the courtroom, a soft voice said, "He isn't the only one." Heads turned. It was the elderly woman from the day before, the one with the Korean War nurse's pin. She stood slowly, a small envelope in hand. "My husband was denied medication coverage in 1997. We were told the paperwork had been misplaced, but I found a copy last year in a mislabeled box. It was stamped, reviewed, and rejected in this court." She stepped forward. Delgado moved to intercept, not to stop her, but to gently take the envelope and deliver it to the bench. Bowers' hand hovered above it, then dropped. "I move that this court be cleared," he said abruptly. "We are no longer in public session." But this time Naomi did not sit back. "No, sir. With respect, this hearing began in public, and it should continue in public. These people have waited years for this moment. They deserve to hear the truth spoken where it was once denied." Delgado didn't move. Neither did anyone else. Bowers stood, but the room didn't bend to his command the way it used to. The title still held weight, but not like it once had. He paused, collected himself, then said tightly, "The court will take a recess." He left through the side door. Naomi exhaled slowly. Maya turned to her, voice small but steady. "What happens now?" Naomi looked around the room at the gathered faces, at the open files, at Delgado holding the envelope like it mattered. "What happens now?" she said softly, "is that we don't stop." Later that evening, Naomi met with the oversight team in a nearby legal office. They were now opening an official inquiry, not just into Bowers, but into every judge whose courtroom shared the same pattern of denial, across state lines, across years. "Will you testify before the board?" they asked. "I'll testify," Naomi said, "but I won't do it alone." She began making calls, not to reporters, not to politicians, to people, to the families in her red binder. To every name who had written her and never heard back, to those who thought their stories didn't matter because they had no one left to speak for them. One by one, they answered. One by one, they said yes. By the end of the night, Naomi had 43 people willing to come forward, 43 stories that had been lost in bureaucratic silence. Now they would be heard, not because Naomi fought alone, but because her stand reminded others of their voice. As dawn approached, Naomi stood on the courthouse steps again. This time, she wasn't alone. She never had been. The morning of the testimony felt different, not colder, not quieter, just heavier, like the day itself understood what was coming. Naomi Carter stood in front of the mirror in her modest guest room, smoothing the edges of her uniform with deliberate care. The Medal of Honor still hung at her chest, gleaming in the dim light like it had that first day. But this time, it wasn't just hers. It belonged to all of them. She opened her phone. Dozens of messages, some from reporters, some from unknown numbers simply saying thank you. Others were more personal. Widows, veterans, nurses, siblings, people who once thought their stories had faded into nothing, now found strength in the rising tide of voices. The hearing wasn't being held in the same courtroom anymore. The location had been moved. Too many people had come forward. Too many documents had surfaced. Too many eyes were watching. So now, it was being held at the State Judiciary Hall. A public inquiry, formal, on the record. Every word typed by court reporters, every statement like every seat filled. Naomi stepped onto the main floor at 9 a.m. sharp. Her boots echoed on the tile as she crossed the space and took her seat among a panel of others. Maya beside her, Delgado in the row behind, and a dozen more men and women who once thought no one would ever listen. The lead commissioner, a tall woman with steel gray hair and a reputation for zero tolerance on institutional abuse, addressed the room. This inquiry has been called in response to evidence provided by retired Major General Naomi Carter, she said, and the testimonies of 43 military families affected by judicial mismanagement, filing suppression, and benefit denial within the state Veterans Assistance System. She paused. This is not about one judge. It is about a system that learned how to ignore quiet suffering. Then she looked at Naomi. You may begin. Naomi rose slowly. The room didn't lean forward. It sat still, waiting, holding breath. She didn't need to raise her voice. 2 months ago I didn't know Maya Roberts, she began. I didn't know her husband's name. I didn't know the battle she was fighting. But I knew something was wrong. I knew the silence she was facing because I'd heard it before. She placed her binder on the table. This isn't about medals. It's not about rank. It's about worth. It's about people who were told their sacrifices didn't qualify, that their pain wasn't enough, that their proof wasn't acceptable, that the paperwork wasn't filed correctly. She opened the binder, and I believed those were isolated tragedies, until I saw how many followed the same pattern. One by one, Naomi read names, dates, denials, terms, like non-service related, administrative error, pending verification, phrases that may have looked official but always meant the same thing, no help. Then Maya stood. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't crack. They told me my husband's death didn't count because he died at home. But he came home with lungs full of dust and a heart full of trauma. He saved lives. Then he died in the same uniform they denied. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded American flag. This was given to me at his funeral. And this, she held up the denial letter, was given to me when I asked for help. Only one of these honored him, one by one. Others came forward. A mother who never got her son's last paycheck. A combat nurse who was denied PTSD treatment due to lack of frontline documentation. A retired staff sergeant who lost his house while waiting for an appeal that never got processed. Each story was more than data. It was a reminder that behind every policy was a person, a life. The commissioner leaned into her mic. We've reviewed the metadata, the altered records, the ignored claims, the quiet rejections. It is the judgment of this board that multiple judicial violations have occurred. She paused. Judge William Bowers has been placed on administrative leave. An ethics investigation is being opened immediately. There was no applause, just silence, then breath, then, as the board recessed. One woman stood in the back, a woman Naomi didn't know, and began clapping slowly, not in celebration but in respect. Others followed. Maya took Naomi's hand. You did it. Naomi shook her head. We did it. And we're not finished, because this was never about one courtroom. It was about all of them. In the days that followed, Naomi met with members of Congress, military support networks, and legal advocacy groups. Policies that had gone unchallenged for decades were suddenly under review. Funding was redirected. Oversight protocols tightened. And one more thing happened. A plaque was quietly added outside the state judiciary hall. Bore no names. Only a single quote. Silence is not justice. Courage is the first act of truth. Naomi never asked for recognition. But one evening, weeks later, she received a letter from a mother in Idaho who had lost her son, and thought no one would care. She ended with just 4 words. You made us visible. Naomi folded the letter, placed it in the back of the red binder, and closed it. This story didn't end in a courtroom. It ended with change, and it began with one woman refusing to be silent.